A middle-aged woman in designer clothes just called Judge Judy lazy, but what happened next exposed a secret that left the entire courtroom speechless and made this Karen's biggest mistake of her life. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in Studio 2A, casting their familiar harsh glow across the iconic courtroom set that had become America's theater of justice for over 2 decades. The gallery was packed with an audience of 75 people, their faces a mix of anticipation and nervous energy, clutching their tickets like golden passes to witness what they hoped would be another legendary Judge Judy takedown. The cameras rolled silently, their red recording lights blinking like the eyes of electronic predators waiting to capture every moment of drama about to unfold. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. At the defendant's table sat Karen Mitchell, a 42-year-old real estate agent from Westchester County. Her perfectly styled blonde hair swept back in what she clearly believed was an authoritative look. Her navy blue Chanel blazer screamed expensive taste. Her manicured nails drummed impatiently against the wooden table, and her ice blue eyes held the unmistakable gleam of someone who had never been told no and didn't plan to start today. She shifted in her chair with the restless energy of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room, checking her diamond-encrusted Apple Watch as if the court schedule should bend to her convenience. This wasn't just any entitled defendant. This was a woman who had built her entire identity around being right, being superior, and being in control. Across the courtroom, behind the towering mahogany bench that had become as iconic as the woman who commanded it, sat Judge Judith Scheindlin, known to the world simply as Judge Judy. At 81 years old, she remained a force of nature wrapped in black judicial robes, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her dark eyes sharp as surgical instruments behind designer glasses that had witnessed more human drama than a therapist's office. Her hands, adorned with simple gold rings, rested calmly on the bench, but those who knew her recognized the stillness as the calm before a storm. Judge Judy had been dispensing justice on television for 28 years, but what the audience didn't know was that she had been keeping count of something that would soon become the most devastating weapon in her arsenal. The case seemed routine enough on paper. Karen was suing her neighbor, Patricia Williams, for $300 over what she claimed was deliberate damage to her prize-winning rose garden during a fence installation. But anyone who had watched Judge Judy for more than 5 minutes knew that the amount of money was never what mattered. It was about respect, accountability, and the eternal battle between entitlement and justice. The production assistant had whispered to the crew that this case had all the makings of a classic blow-up. But none of them could have predicted what was about to happen. The bailiff, Petrie Hawkins Bird, stood at attention near the bench, his 25 years of experience telling him that the energy in the room was different today. There was a tension that seemed to vibrate through the studio air, an electricity that made even the seasoned crew members lean forward in anticipation. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her machine, ready to capture every word of what promised to be another chapter in the Judge Judy legend. But hidden beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary small claims dispute was a moment that would become viral gold, a confrontation that would expose the true cost of disrespecting someone who had dedicated her entire life to the pursuit of justice. Karen had no idea that she was about to commit courtroom suicide. She had no clue that the woman sitting behind that bench had been documenting every single case, every single decision, every single moment of her extraordinary career with the precision of a master accountant. Judge Judy's secret weapon wasn't just her sharp tongue or her legendary wit. It was a number so staggering, so impressive, that it would transform Karen's moment of arrogance into a masterclass in humiliation that would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms. The cameras captured Karen's confident smirk as she prepared to challenge the most respected television judge in history, completely unaware that she was about to discover why some people become legends and others become cautionary tales. This wasn't just another small claims case about a garden fence. This was about to become the most satisfying 7 minutes of television ever recorded. A moment when entitlement would collide headfirst with achievement, and America would finally get to witness what happens when someone mistakes patience for weakness. The countdown had begun, and Karen Mitchell was about to learn that calling Judge Judy lazy wasn't just insulting. It was about to be the most expensive $300 mistake of her life. If you want to see what happens when ultimate entitlement meets unstoppable experience, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what Judge Judy reveals next will leave you speechless. Trust me, you've never seen a takedown like this before. The familiar gavel strike echoed through Studio 2A as Judge Judy called the court to order, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect in courtrooms for over 4 decades. "We're here today because Ms. Mitchell is suing her neighbor, Patricia Williams, for $300 in damages to her rose garden." "Ms. Mitchell, tell me what happened." The words were spoken with Judge Judy's trademark directness, but those who knew her recognized the slight edge that suggested she had already sized up the situation and found it wanting. Karen Mitchell stood with the theatrical flair of someone accustomed to commanding attention at PTA meetings and homeowner association gatherings. She smoothed her designer blazer and cleared her throat with exaggerated importance, her posture screaming that she was about to deliver the performance of a lifetime. "Your Honor," she began, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension reserved for customer service representatives and people she deemed beneath her station. "This is a very serious matter involving my award-winning garden that has been featured in Better Homes and Gardens magazine." She paused dramatically, as if expecting applause for this revelation, completely missing the way Judge Judy's eyebrow arched with barely concealed irritation. The story that tumbled from Karen's lips was a masterpiece of entitled victimhood wrapped in designer clothing and delivered with the conviction of someone who had never been challenged. According to Karen, her neighbor Patricia had deliberately and maliciously damaged her prized rose garden while installing a new fence between their properties. "These weren't just any roses, Your Honor. These were heritage varieties that cost me over $2,000 to cultivate. The David Austin English roses alone were worth $800, and now they're completely destroyed because of her careless, vindictive behavior." Karen's voice rose with each word, her hands gesturing wildly as she painted herself as the victim of a calculated attack on her horticultural masterpiece. Judge Judy listened with the stone-faced patience of someone who had heard every variation of human drama imaginable, her dark eyes fixed on Karen with the intensity of a predator watching its prey. "Ms. Mitchell, do you have photographs of this damage? Receipts for these expensive roses? Any documentation of this devastation you're describing?" The questions were simple, direct, and completely reasonable, but they hit Karen like ice water on her theatrical fire. Karen's confident smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to talking her way out of corners. "Well, Your Honor, I didn't think to take pictures immediately because I was so traumatized by what I saw. And the receipts, well, I paid cash for most of the plants because I prefer to support local nurseries. And you know how small businesses are with their record-keeping." She waved her hand dismissively, as if the lack of evidence was merely a minor inconvenience rather than a fatal flaw in her case. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the collective wisdom of 75 Judge Judy veterans recognizing the familiar pattern of a defendant digging their own grave with increasingly elaborate excuses. In the gallery, a woman in her 60s shook her head knowingly while a young man pulled out his phone to record what he sensed was about to become social media gold. The camera operators, veterans of thousands of cases, zoomed in slightly on Karen's face, their professional instincts telling them that the real show was about to begin. Patricia Williams, the defendant, stood quietly at her table, a 58-year-old elementary school teacher, whose modest appearance and calm demeanor provided a stark contrast to Karen's theatrical performance. She clutched a manila folder thick with photographs, receipts, and documentation, waiting patiently for her turn to speak. The irony was palpable. The person being accused of destruction had come prepared with evidence, while the accuser had arrived armed only with attitude and assumptions. Judge Judy's patience was wearing thin, and those familiar with her legendary temperament could see the warning signs. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her fingers drummed once against the bench and her head tilted slightly to the side in the way that had preceded thousands of devastating cross-examinations. "Ms. Mitchell, in my courtroom we deal in facts, not feelings. We need evidence, not elaborate stories. Do you have anything concrete to support your claim? Or are we supposed to take your word for it because you shop at expensive nurseries?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Karen's face flushed with the indignation of someone unaccustomed to having her word questioned. She straightened her shoulders and fixed Judge Judy with a look that would have intimidated a department store manager, but was laughably ineffective against a woman who had faced down hardened criminals in family court. "Your Honor, I don't appreciate having my integrity questioned. I'm a respected member of my community and my word should be sufficient." The words came out clipped and sharp, each syllable dripping with the entitlement that had carried her through life, unchallenged. But Judge Judy wasn't a department store manager or a school administrator or any of the other people who had learned it was easier to give Karen what she wanted than to deal with her theatrics. This was a woman who had spent decades cutting through lies, excuses, and manipulation with surgical precision. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the audience could feel the tension building like electricity before a thunderstorm. Karen Mitchell was about to learn that there's a difference between people who give you what you want and people who give you what you deserve. The temperature in Studio 2A seemed to rise as Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice cutting through Karen's wall of excuses like a blade through silk. Ms. Mitchell, let me be crystal clear. In my courtroom, your community reputation means nothing. Your designer clothes mean nothing. What matters is evidence, and you have provided exactly zero proof of your claims. Now, do you have receipts for these allegedly expensive roses, or are we playing make-believe? The words landed with surgical precision, each syllable designed to strip away the protective layers of entitlement that Karen had wrapped around herself like armor. Karen's perfectly composed facade began to crack, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the defendant's table until her knuckles turned white. The woman who had sailed through life on charm, connections, and calculated intimidation was discovering that none of her usual weapons worked against someone who had seen every manipulation tactic in the book. Your Honor, I resent the implication that I'm lying. I've been a pillar of my community for over 20 years. I serve on the school board, I chair the garden club, and I've raised over $50,000 for local charities. Her voice rose with each credential, as if her resume could somehow transform her lack of evidence into fact. Judge Judy's expression didn't soften even slightly. If anything, the mention of Karen's various positions seemed to irritate her further. Ms. Mitchell, I don't care if you're the Queen of England. Bring me receipts, photographs, witness statements, something other than your opinion of yourself. The audience began to murmur, sensing that this wasn't going to be the quick victory Karen had obviously expected when she strutted into the courtroom. That's when Karen made her first critical error. Instead of backing down or attempting to salvage what remained of her case, she doubled down with the desperation of someone watching their carefully constructed world crumble in real time. This whole process is ridiculous, she snapped, her voice losing its practiced sweetness and revealing the steel underneath. I shouldn't have to prove anything to anyone. The damage is obvious, and anyone with eyes can see that woman. She pointed dramatically at Patricia, deliberately destroyed my garden out of pure spite. The courtroom fell silent except for the barely audible hum of cameras capturing every moment of Karen's meltdown. Judge Judy's dark eyes glittered with something that could have been amusement if it weren't so dangerous. Ms. Mitchell, are you seriously telling me that you came into my courtroom expecting me to award you $300 based on your word alone? No evidence, no proof, just your say-so? Karen's face flushed a deep red that clashed horribly with her carefully chosen outfit. Her breath came in short, angry bursts as she realized that her usual tactics weren't just failing. They were backfiring spectacularly. I don't understand why this is so difficult, she hissed, her voice dripping with frustration. I'm telling you what happened. Isn't that enough? Why do I need to jump through hoops to prove what everyone already knows? Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth that any Judge Judy veteran would recognize as the calm before the storm. The audience held its collective breath, sensing that they were witnessing the build-up to something spectacular. Karen Mitchell, in her designer blazer and entitled fury, had just walked into a trap of her own making, and she didn't even realize it yet. The countdown to destruction had begun, and America was about to witness what happens when unstoppable arrogance meets immovable authority. What happened next would become the most replayed 7 seconds in television history. Karen Mitchell, her face twisted with rage and desperation, committed courtroom suicide with 4 words that would haunt her forever. Judge Judy had just asked her one final time for any shred of evidence to support her case, when Karen's last thread of self-control snapped like a guitar string under too much tension. You know what? Karen shrieked, her voice rising to a pitch that made the sound engineers wince and reach for their equipment. You're not even listening to me. You just sit there behind that bench asking the same stupid questions over and over again. You don't care about justice, you're just lazy. The word lazy exploded from her lips like a verbal grenade, detonating in the silence of Studio 2A with the force of a thunderclap. The courtroom became a vacuum of sound so complete that the air conditioning seemed to roar like a freight train. 75 audience members sat frozen in their seats, mouths agape, eyes wide with the kind of shock reserved for witnessing car accidents and natural disasters. The camera operator's hands trembled slightly as he zoomed in on Judge Judy's face, capturing the moment that would be dissected frame by frame across social media platforms within minutes. Judge Judy sat completely motionless, her dark eyes fixed on Karen with the intensity of a laser beam. Her hands remained folded calmly on the bench, but something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere of the courtroom. It was the kind of stillness that comes before earthquakes, the eerie calm that precedes devastating storms. Even Bailiff Byrd, veteran of thousands of explosive moments, raised his eyebrows in a mixture of disbelief and anticipation. Karen, apparently unaware that she had just triggered a nuclear response, stood with her chin raised defiantly, as if calling one of America's most respected television personalities lazy was somehow a brilliant legal strategy. The red recording lights on the cameras seemed to pulse like heartbeats, capturing every microsecond of what would become the most spectacular professional destruction in television history. Judge Judy slowly removed her glasses, cleaned them with deliberate precision, and replaced them with the methodical calm of someone preparing to deliver justice in its purest, most devastating form. Judge Judy's voice, when it finally came, was softer than a whisper, but carried the weight of 28 years of television justice. "Lazy?" she repeated, the single word hanging in the air like a death sentence. "Ms. Mitchell, let me educate you about lazy." What happened next was surgical precision disguised as conversational storytelling. In my career, I have personally decided over 25,000 cases. That's 25,000 disputes, 25,000 decisions, 25,000 moments where real people trusted me with their problems. Her voice gained momentum like a gathering storm. That breaks down to over 1,000 cases per year, every single year, for 25 consecutive years without a break. The courtroom was transfixed as Judge Judy continued her methodical demolition. Before this show, I spent 14 years as a family court judge in Manhattan, handling the most heartbreaking cases imaginable. Child custody disputes, domestic violence, adoption proceedings. I've worked 6 days a week, 52 weeks a year for 4 decades. Karen's face had drained of all color, her earlier defiance replaced by dawning horror as the magnitude of her mistake became clear. The audience leaned forward, watching the systematic destruction of entitled arrogance by pure, undeniable achievement. Judge Judy wasn't finished. She was just getting started, and Karen was about to discover exactly how deep this hole could get. Can you believe what just happened? If you're enjoying Judge Judy absolutely destroying this entitled Karen, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what you think Karen was thinking right now. But wait, it gets even better because Judge Judy wasn't done annihilating her. Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice gaining the rhythm of someone delivering a masterclass in professional achievement. "Ms. Mitchell, since you seem confused about what constitutes work, let me break this down further. I earned my law degree from New York University Law School, spent years as a prosecutor in the family court system, authored 7 books, won multiple Emmy Awards, and became the highest-paid television personality in history at $47 million per year. The numbers hit Karen like physical blows, each achievement another nail in the coffin of her credibility. Her designer blazer suddenly looked like a costume, her confident posture crumbled into a defeated slouch, and her mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish gasping for air. "You want to talk about lazy?" Judge Judy continued, her voice now carrying the full weight of decades of earned authority. "I tape 260 episodes annually, resolve disputes in minutes that take other courts months to handle, and have maintained the highest television ratings in daytime for over 2 decades. I've built an empire on competence while you've built a case on complaints." The audience erupted in thunderous applause, some rising to their feet in appreciation of witnessing pure professional dominance. Karen attempted to speak, stammering pathetic attempts at backtracking, but Judge Judy silenced her with a single raised hand. "Case dismissed. You came into my courtroom with no evidence, no respect, and no clue. Get out." The final verdict landed with the finality of a tomb closing. Karen's walk to the exit was the longest 30 feet of her life, captured in excruciating detail by cameras that would make this moment internet immortality. The moment Karen Mitchell's designer heels clicked out of Studio 2A for the final time, the internet exploded into chaos. Within 30 minutes of the episode airing, hashtags like 9LazyKaren and 9JudgeJudyDestroysKaren were trending worldwide, with the clip garnering over 2 million views in its first hour alone. Social media platforms crashed under the weight of shares, comments, and reactions, as viewers dissected every second of what many called the most satisfying takedown in television history. The audience members who witnessed the destruction firsthand became instant celebrities themselves, giving interviews to entertainment reporters about what it felt like to watch pure entitlement get obliterated by decades of earned respect. "I've been coming to Judge Judy tapings for 5 years," said Margaret Thompson, a retired teacher from Queens. "But I've never seen anything like that. The woman actually called Judge Judy lazy. I couldn't believe the audacity." Meanwhile, Karen Mitchell discovered that becoming an internet meme was significantly less glamorous than her previous 15 minutes of fame in Better Homes and Gardens. Her real estate business suffered as potential clients recognized her as that woman who disrespected Judge Judy, and her position on the school board became untenable when parents demanded her resignation. The $300 lawsuit had cost her everything that mattered to her: reputation, respect, and relevance. But the real impact went far beyond one entitled woman's spectacular downfall. The clip became a cultural phenomenon, shared by everyone from corporate executives to college students as the perfect example of what happens when arrogance meets achievement. It sparked conversations about respect for experience, the difference between confidence and entitlement, and why credentials earned through decades of hard work matter more than designer clothes. And social status. Judge Judy's systematic dismantling of Karen's attitude became required viewing in business schools as a masterclass in maintaining composure under attack while delivering devastating responses. The 25,000 cases became a rallying cry for professionals everywhere who had ever been underestimated or disrespected by someone who confused privilege with competence. The lesson was crystal clear. In a world where social media fame and designer labels often masquerade as actual achievement, there's still nothing more powerful than decades of proven excellence. Judge Judy had shown America that real authority comes not from attitude, but from accomplishment, not from entitlement, but from earning every single victory through relentless dedication to craft. That's what happens when ultimate entitlement meets unstoppable experience. If you loved seeing Judge Judy completely demolish this Karen's arrogance, you absolutely need to subscribe for more incredible courtroom moments and epic takedowns. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when justice is served perfectly, and let me know in the comments. What was your favorite part of Judge Judy's legendary response? Was it the 25,000 cases, the $47 million salary, or just watching Karen's face melt in real time? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where more entitled people get exactly what they deserve. In Judge Judy's courtroom, an entitled Karen stood up and screamed that the famous judge was showing favoritism, claiming the entire show was rigged against her. But what Karen didn't know was that the bailiff had been secretly recording her lies for weeks, and the evidence he was about to reveal would expose the most shocking courtroom scam in television history. The cameras captured every second as Karen's world crumbled in front of millions, and what happened next left even Judge Judy speechless. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. The tension in that courtroom was suffocating. Karen, dressed in her finest outfit, thought she had outsmarted everyone. She had rehearsed her victim story, prepared her crocodile tears, and was ready to manipulate America's toughest judge. Her confidence was unshakable as she sat there, believing her elaborate lies would fool the woman who had seen it all. But the bailiff, standing silently in the corner, held evidence so damning that it would destroy Karen's entire facade in seconds. Judge Judy, with her piercing eyes and decades of experience, sensed something was wrong from the moment Karen walked in. The way Karen carried herself, the way she spoke, the way she looked around the courtroom like she owned it, all triggered Judge Judy's instincts. But even the sharpest legal mind in television couldn't have predicted the bombshell that was about to explode. The bailiff stepped forward, his hand reaching for a folder that contained the most devastating evidence ever presented in that courtroom. What started as a simple case about property damage was about to become the most watched courtroom takedown in internet history. Karen's accusation of favoritism was just the beginning. The real story, the one that would leave viewers screaming at their screens, was hidden in that folder. And when the bailiff finally spoke, Karen's face went from smug confidence to absolute terror in the span of 3 words. If you love seeing entitled people get completely destroyed by their own lies, smash that like button right now, because what happens next will blow your mind and restore your faith in justice. The studio lights blazed down on Judge Judy's iconic courtroom as millions of viewers across America settled in for what they thought would be another routine case. The familiar wooden bench gleamed under the harsh television lighting, and the American flag stood proudly in the corner, a symbol of the justice that was about to unfold. Camera operators adjusted their lenses, sound technicians checked their equipment, and producers whispered excitedly in the control room. None of them realized they were about to witness television history. Judge Judy Sheindlin sat behind her bench like a fortress of justice, her silver hair perfectly styled, her reading glasses perched on her nose, and her famous no-nonsense expression already set in stone. For over 2 decades she had seen every type of liar, every kind of scammer, and every variety of entitled person who thought they could outsmart her. Her fingers drummed impatiently on the wooden surface as she reviewed the case file, her keen eyes scanning the details with the precision of a surgeon. Something about this case felt different, heavier, more charged with potential drama than usual. The bailiff, Petrie Hawkins Bird, stood at his post with military precision, his uniform crisp, his posture perfect, his eyes alert and scanning the room like a guardian protecting sacred ground. For years he had been Judge Judy's silent sentinel, the man who maintained order when chaos threatened to explode. But today his role would expand far beyond keeping the peace. Hidden in his jacket pocket was a manila folder that would change everything. evidence so explosive that even he felt the weight of its contents pressing against his chest. Then there was Karen, the defendant who strutted into the courtroom like she was walking into her own personal victory parade. Her blonde hair was styled in the classic, "I want to speak to the manager" cut. Her designer handbag swung from her arm with exaggerated importance, and her high heels clicked against the floor, with the rhythm of someone who believed the world owed her everything. She wore a bright pink blazer that screamed for attention, her makeup applied so thickly it looked like war paint, and her jewelry sparkled under the studio lights like armor made of entitlement. Karen's eyes surveyed the courtroom with the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up her prey. She had done her homework, watched countless episodes, and was convinced she had figured out Judge Judy's weaknesses. Her lips curved into a barely concealed smirk as she took her place at the defendant's podium, her manicured fingers gripping the wooden rail like she was claiming territory. She adjusted her blazer, fluffed her hair, and shot a dismissive glance at the plaintiff standing across from her. The plaintiff, a soft-spoken elderly man named Harold, stood nervously at his podium, clutching a worn manila folder containing what he believed was his only hope for justice. His weathered hands shook slightly as he organized his papers, his kind eyes reflecting the stress of months of dealing with Karen's harassment and destruction. Harold had worked his entire life, saved every penny, and now found himself in this surreal television courtroom, praying that Judge Judy would see through Karen's lies and manipulation. The audience, packed with curious onlookers and court show enthusiasts, buzzed with anticipation. They had no idea they were about to witness the most spectacular courtroom meltdown ever captured on camera. Some leaned forward in their seats, sensing the electricity in the air. Others whispered among themselves, trying to guess which side would emerge victorious. All of them were completely unprepared for the nuclear explosion of drama that was about to detonate. The production crew moved with practiced efficiency, but there was something different about today's energy. Camera operators found themselves instinctively adjusting for closer shots, sensing that something monumental was brewing. The director's voice crackled through headsets, reminding everyone to be ready for anything. Even the court reporter's fingers hovered over her keyboard with unusual tension, as if she could feel the weight of the words she was about to transcribe. Karen checked her reflection in her phone's camera one last time, practicing her innocent victim expression. She had rehearsed her story so many times that she almost believed it herself. Her plan was foolproof, her lies were perfectly crafted, and her confidence was unshakable. She was about to take on America's toughest judge and win, or so she thought. The bailiff's hand unconsciously touched the folder in his pocket, feeling the weight of the evidence that would soon destroy Karen's entire world. His years of experience had taught him to read people, and everything about Karen screamed deception. But what he had discovered about her went far beyond simple lies. It was a pattern of calculated manipulation that would shock even Judge Judy's hardened sensibilities. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the cameras were rolling. What happened next would leave the entire courtroom and millions of viewers absolutely stunned. Judge Judy's gavel struck the bench with the sharp crack of authority that had become her trademark, and the courtroom fell into immediate silence. Her voice cut through the air like a blade as she announced the case. We're here today because the plaintiff, Harold Mitchell, claims that the defendant, Karen Stevenson, deliberately destroyed his vintage car and then refused to pay for the damages. Let's start with you, Mr. Mitchell. Harold stepped closer to his microphone, his voice trembling slightly as he began to tell his story. He explained how Karen had been his neighbor for 3 years, how tensions had escalated over a property line dispute, and how one morning he had awakened to find his beloved 1967 Mustang, his pride and joy that he had spent decades restoring, completely vandalized. The paint was scratched with deep gouges, the windows were shattered, and the interior was destroyed beyond repair. His voice broke as he described finding his car, the one thing that connected him to his late father's memory, ruined in his own driveway. Judge Judy listened intently, her eyes narrowing as Harold presented his evidence. Photos of the destroyed vehicle filled the courtroom monitors, showing the extent of the deliberate damage. Harold had security camera footage from across the street that showed a figure approaching his car in the middle of the night, but the image was too grainy to definitively identify the person. However, he had other evidence that pointed directly to Karen, including witness statements from other neighbors who had heard her threatening to teach him a lesson just days before the incident. Karen stood at her podium with a look of practiced innocence, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief as if she couldn't fathom how anyone could accuse her of such a thing. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, complete with perfectly timed gasps of shock and wounded expressions that she had clearly rehearsed in front of a mirror. She clutched her designer purse tighter as the evidence mounted, but her confidence never wavered. When Judge Judy turned her attention to Karen, the defendant immediately launched into her prepared defense. Her voice dripped with false sincerity, as she claimed she was being framed by a vindictive neighbor, who couldn't accept that she was a successful businesswoman. Karen insisted that Harold had always been jealous of her lifestyle, her beautiful home, and her expensive cars. She painted herself as the victim of a bitter old man who was trying to destroy her reputation and steal her hard-earned money. Karen's story was elaborate and detailed, almost too perfect in its construction. She claimed to have been out of town during the time of the vandalism, visiting her sick mother in another state. She even produced what appeared to be hospital records and hotel receipts to support her alibi. Her presentation was smooth, confident, and convincing to anyone who didn't know what Judge Judy and the bailiff already suspected. But Judge Judy's experienced eyes caught the subtle tells that betrayed Karen's deception. The way Karen's hands fidgeted when she spoke about her alibi, the slight pause before each major claim, and the overly rehearsed quality of her emotional responses all triggered Judge Judy's finely tuned instincts for detecting lies. The judge had seen thousands of liars over her career, and Karen was displaying every classic sign of someone desperately trying to sell a fabricated story. The bailiff watched from his position, his trained eye noting Karen's body language and the inconsistencies in her timeline. As someone who had worked in law enforcement before joining Judge Judy's team, he could read people like open books. Karen's performance might have fooled some people, but it wasn't fooling him. His hand moved unconsciously toward the folder in his pocket, the evidence that would soon tear apart Karen's carefully constructed lies. As Karen continued her defense, her true personality began to seep through the cracks of her victim facade. Small hints of entitlement crept into her voice when she spoke about Harold, subtle suggestions that he was beneath her social status and unworthy of her consideration. She made passive-aggressive comments about his rundown property and his obsession with that old car, revealing the contempt she had been trying to hide. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed, watching Karen with the intensity of a hawk studying its prey. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to rise as the tension built, and everyone could sense that something explosive was about to happen. The courtroom tension reached a breaking point when Judge Judy leaned forward and delivered her signature. Piercing stare directly at Karen. "Ms. Stevenson, your story has more holes than Swiss cheese, and frankly, I don't believe a word you're saying." Her voice carried the weight of decades of courtroom experience, and her eyes blazed with the fire of someone who had caught a liar red-handed. Karen's carefully constructed mask of innocence began to crack. Her face flushed red as she realized her performance wasn't working on America's toughest judge. For someone accustomed to manipulating her way out of every situation, facing Judge Judy's unwavering scrutiny was like being stripped naked in front of millions. Her hands clenched into fists as she struggled to maintain her composure. "Your Honor, with all due respect," Karen's voice began to rise, the sweet facade melting away like sugar in rain. "You're not even listening to my side of the story. You made up your mind the moment I walked in here." Her tone shifted from submissive to aggressive, revealing the entitled monster that had been lurking beneath her polite exterior. Judge Judy's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. In her decades on the bench, few defendants had the audacity to challenge her directly. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice dangerously low, a warning sign that anyone familiar with her show would recognize as the calm before the storm. But Karen was too blinded by rage and desperation to heed the warning. She stepped closer to the microphone, her voice rising to a near shout. "This whole show is rigged. You're showing complete favoritism toward him because he's playing the victim card. You don't care about the truth, you just want good television?" The words exploded from her mouth like venom, each accusation more outrageous than the last. The courtroom erupted in gasps. The audience members looked at each other in shock, unable to believe they were witnessing someone accuse Judge Judy of corruption on live television. The camera operator zoomed in on Karen's face, capturing every detail of her meltdown as it unfolded in real time. Karen wasn't finished. Her entitlement reached nuclear levels as she pointed an accusatory finger at Judge Judy. "You've been against me from the start. This isn't justice, this is a witch hunt. I'm a successful businesswoman, and you can't stand that I won't be intimidated by your reputation." Her voice cracked with hysteria as she completely abandoned any pretense of respect or decorum. Judge Judy sat in stunned silence for a moment, her mouth slightly agape. In all her years of dealing with difficult defendants, she had never encountered such blatant disrespect and outrageous accusations. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, everyone waiting to see how the legendary judge would respond to this unprecedented attack. But before Judge Judy could unleash her famous wrath, the bailiff stepped forward from his post. His movement was subtle but purposeful, and the folder in his hand caught the light as he approached the bench. Karen, still fuming from her outburst, didn't notice that her world was about to completely collapse. The bailiff stepped forward with the calm authority of someone who held a nuclear weapon in his hands. His voice cut through the stunned silence like a knife through butter. "Your Honor, if I may interrupt," he said, his tone respectful but urgent. "I have evidence that Ms. Stevenson needs to see." Karen's head snapped toward the bailiff, her eyes wide with confusion and growing panic. She had been so focused on attacking Judge Judy that she hadn't noticed the bailiff moving into position. Her mouth opened as if to object, but no words came out as she watched him approach the bench with a thick manila folder. "Ms. Stevenson," the bailiff said, turning to face her directly, his voice steady and professional. "You claimed you were out of town visiting your sick mother during the time of the vandalism, correct?" Karen nodded frantically, her confidence beginning to crumble as she sensed the trap closing around her. The bailiff opened the folder with deliberate precision, pulling out a stack of photographs that made Karen's face go completely white. "These are security camera images from the gas station, 2 blocks from Mr. Mitchell's house, taken at 2:47 a.m. on the night of the vandalism. That's your car, Ms. Stevenson, and that's you getting out of it." The courtroom exploded in gasps as the images appeared on the monitors. The photos were crystal clear, showing Karen in the same pink blazer she was wearing in court, her distinctive blonde hair unmistakable even in the dim lighting. Her license plate was clearly visible, and the timestamp proved she was lying about her whereabouts. But the bailiff wasn't finished. He pulled out another set of documents that made Karen stumble backward. "We also have records showing that the hospital you claimed to visit your mother at has no record of any patient with her name during that entire week. The hotel receipts you provided? They're forgeries and poorly done ones at that." Karen's legs nearly gave out as the evidence mounted. Her mouth moved wordlessly as she tried to process how completely her lies had been exposed. Judge Judy leaned forward, her eyes blazing with a mixture of satisfaction and fury at being lied to so boldly. The final blow came when the bailiff revealed witness statements from 3 different neighbors who had seen Karen vandalizing the car and had been too afraid to come forward until now. They were worried about retaliation, the bailiff explained, but they couldn't let an innocent man be blamed for what you did. Karen's world imploded in that moment, her lies shattered beyond repair, her reputation destroyed on live television. Judge Judy's eyes blazed with a fire that could have melted steel as she stared down at Karen, who now stood trembling at the defendant's podium like a cornered animal. The legendary judge had dealt with thousands of liars over her career, but Karen's brazen attempt to manipulate the court and accuse her of favoritism had crossed a line that should never be crossed. "Ms. Stevenson," Judge Judy began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered such a calculated, deliberate, and disgusting display of perjury and manipulation." Each word hit Karen like a physical blow, and her knees visibly buckled as the full force of Judge Judy's wrath descended upon her. Karen tried desperately to interrupt, her voice cracking with panic. "Your Honor, I can explain. Those photos could be—" But Judge Judy's hand shot up like a stop sign, silencing her immediately. "You will not speak unless I tell you to speak." Judge Judy roared, her voice echoing through the courtroom with thunderous authority. "You came into my courtroom, lied under oath, forged documents, and had the unmitigated gall to accuse me of favoritism, when your own evidence proved you were a criminal." The courtroom was so silent that every breath could be heard. Camera operators zoomed in on Karen's face, capturing every detail of her complete breakdown as Judge Judy continued her devastating verbal assault. "You destroyed an elderly man's prized possession out of pure spite and malice, then came here thinking you could fool me with your pathetic performance." Judge Judy continued, her voice rising to a crescendo. "Well, congratulations, Ms. Stevenson. You've just earned yourself the maximum judgment possible." Judge Judy's gavel struck the bench with the finality of a gunshot. "I'm ordering you to pay Mr. Mitchell $15,000 for the destruction of his vehicle, plus $5,000 in punitive damages for your lies and contempt of this court. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." Karen's face went ashen as the reality of her situation crashed down on her. She had come into the courtroom expecting an easy victory, and instead found herself facing financial ruin and potential jail time. Her legs gave out and she grabbed the podium for support, as the audience erupted in thunderous applause. Harold wiped tears of relief from his eyes as justice was finally served, while Karen stood frozen in shock, her world completely destroyed by her own arrogance and lies. Within hours of the episode airing, Karen's courtroom meltdown exploded across the internet like digital wildfire. The clip of her accusing Judge Judy of favoritism, followed by the bailiff's devastating evidence reveal, racked up over 10 million views in the first day alone. Social media platforms crashed under the weight of shares, comments, and reactions as the world witnessed the most spectacular courtroom takedown in television history. Can you believe Karen thought she could outsmart Judge Judy and get away with it? If this bailiff just became your personal hero, smash that subscribe button because we're about to show you how the internet reacted to this legendary moment. Twitter exploded with hashtags like Nah Karen vs Judge Judy, Bailiff Hero, and Osh Justice served trending worldwide within hours. TikTok users created thousands of reaction videos, with teenagers gasping in disbelief and grandparents cheering from their living rooms. The moment when Karen's face went white after seeing the security footage became an instant meme, shared millions of times with captions like, "When your lies catch up to you" and "Reality check incoming." News outlets from CNN to Fox News covered the story, calling it the most dramatic courtroom moment since the O.J. Simpson trial. Legal experts praised the bailiff's investigative work, with one former prosecutor stating, "This is exactly why perjury laws exist." Karen thought she could commit a crime and then lie her way out of it on national television. Facebook groups dedicated to Judge Judy fans gained hundreds of thousands of new members overnight, all sharing their favorite moments from Karen's destruction. Comments poured in from around the world, with viewers from Australia, the United Kingdom, and Canada expressing their amazement at the bailiff's perfect timing and Judge Judy's righteous fury. The real impact went far beyond entertainment. Harold received thousands of supportive messages and donations from strangers who were moved by his story. A crowdfunding campaign to help him restore another classic car raised over $50,000 in just 1 week. Meanwhile, Karen became the poster child for entitled behavior, her name synonymous with lying and manipulation. Law enforcement officials revealed that Karen's case inspired them to investigate similar patterns of neighbor harassment, leading to several arrests across the country. Judge Judy herself later said in interviews that Karen's case reminded her why she loved bringing justice to ordinary people who couldn't get it anywhere else. The episode became the most watched in Judge Judy's history, proving that America still hungered for truth, justice, and watching entitled people face the consequences of their actions. This bailiff didn't just expose Karen's lies, he restored faith in justice itself. If this epic takedown made your day, smash that like button, subscribe for more incredible courtroom karma, and comment below what you would have said to Karen after she got exposed. Join our membership for exclusive behind-the-scenes content and early access to the most shocking courtroom moments. Let's celebrate real heroes like this bailiff together. Karen Mitchell thought she was about to humiliate Judge Judy on national television. The 45-year-old real estate agent from Westchester sat in the plaintiff's chair, her perfectly styled blonde bob quivering with barely contained rage, as she clutched a folder she believed contained her ticket to victory. What Karen didn't know was that in exactly 18 minutes, she would be physically carried out of the courtroom by 2 police officers, while screaming about her constitutional rights. But here's the part that will blow your mind. Karen actually called 911 on Judge Judy during the trial, demanding that America's toughest TV judge be arrested for doing her job. The footage of what happened next became the most viral courtroom moment in television history, ending Karen's career and creating a meme that's still being shared 5 years later. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Karen had walked into that Los Angeles studio with the supreme confidence of someone who had never truly faced consequences for her entitled behavior. Dressed in her signature power suit, carrying her designer purse like a weapon, she had spent the entire morning telling anyone who would listen that Judge Judy was about to meet her match. She has no idea who she's dealing with, Karen had bragged to the other plaintiffs in the waiting area. I am a licensed professional. I know the law better than some TV judge who's just there for entertainment. The other plaintiffs had exchanged uncomfortable glances, but Karen was too wrapped up in her own narrative to notice. She had come prepared with what she thought was an airtight case, armed with documents she was certain would prove Judge Judy wrong and force an apology on live television. The case itself seemed straightforward enough. Karen was suing her neighbor Maria Santos for $2,500 over a fence dispute, but this wasn't just about property lines. This was about Karen's fundamental belief that her status as a successful real estate agent gave her the right to override anyone she considered beneath her social class. The fence she had built was 6 inches onto Maria's property, and when the quiet housekeeper had politely asked her to move it, Karen had not only refused but had actually demanded that Maria pay her for the improvements to the property line. When Maria had threatened to remove the fence herself, Karen had filed the lawsuit claiming emotional distress and property damage. In Karen's mind, this was an open and shut case of putting an uppity immigrant back in her place. What made Karen's confidence so tragically misplaced was that she had fundamentally misunderstood both her opponent and the arena she was entering. Judge Judy Shandlin wasn't some pushover local magistrate, who could be intimidated by loud voices and threats of lawsuits. At 79 years old, the former family court judge had built a television empire by demolishing entitled people exactly like Karen. Her Brooklyn-bred, no-nonsense approach had made her the highest-paid person on television, precisely because she refused to coddle people who thought their money or status put them above basic human decency. Judge Judy had been cutting through entitled nonsense for over 2 decades, and she had developed a particular talent for identifying Karens within the first 30 seconds of meeting them. As Karen sat in that plaintiff's chair, adjusting her jacket and practicing her opening statement under her breath, she had no idea that the production staff was already placing bets on how quickly Judge Judy would destroy her. The camera operators had seen enough entitled plaintiffs to recognize the warning signs. The way Karen had demanded a different chair because the original was uncomfortable, her insistence on having her water served in glass instead of plastic, and her actual attempt to negotiate better camera angles for her good side. But most telling of all was the folder Karen kept clutching like a security blanket, filled with documents she was convinced would prove her intellectual superiority over everyone in the room. She had no clue that those same documents would become the instruments of her complete and utter humiliation. The irony of Karen's situation was breathtaking in its completeness. She had come to Judge Judy's court believing she was the smartest person in the room, armed with what she thought was devastating evidence against a simple housekeeper. Instead, she was about to face a legal mind that had been honed by decades of actual courtroom experience, backed by the full authority of a television production that had no patience for racist, entitled behavior. Karen's folder, which she thought contained her path to victory, actually contained a survey that clearly showed her fence was illegally placed on her neighbor's property. But Karen had either never actually read the document carefully, or had convinced herself that her professional opinion could override official measurements. Before we dive into the most epic courtroom meltdown in television history, hit that like button and subscribe for the most shocking Judge Judy moments you've never seen. Comment below where you're watching from and if you've ever dealt with a Karen this delusional. Trust me, what happens next will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about entitled behavior and its consequences. Karen Mitchell wasn't just any entitled suburban mom, she was the final boss of Karens, a woman who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of using her professional credentials as a weapon against anyone she deemed inferior. Her real estate career had given her just enough knowledge to be dangerous, and just enough success to believe she was untouchable. With her $800,000 Westchester home, her white BMW with the custom license plate Realtor 1, and her signature blonde bob that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," Karen had built her entire identity around being right, being important, and being feared by service workers across 3 zip codes. Her Yelp reviews read like a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare, and her Nextdoor posts were legendary for their ability to turn minor neighborhood disputes into full-scale community drama. What made Karen particularly dangerous was her complete inability to recognize when she was wrong, combined with an arsenal of phrases designed to escalate any situation into a crisis that required managerial intervention. She had never met a customer service situation she couldn't turn into a discrimination lawsuit, never encountered a store policy she couldn't claim violated her constitutional rights, and never faced a person of color in a service position without somehow making it about her superior understanding of how things work in America. Her social media was a museum of entitlement, filled with photos of herself at charity galas where she donated just enough to buy social status, complaints about her housekeeper not organizing her closet properly, and long rants about how hard it was to find good help who understood quality standards. The woman sitting across the courtroom from Karen couldn't have been more different. Maria Santos, 52, had immigrated from El Salvador 20 years earlier with nothing but determination and a work ethic that put most Americans to shame. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning houses during the day, stocking shelves at a grocery store in the evenings, and babysitting on weekends, all to support her 2 teenage daughters and send money back to her elderly parents. Maria had saved for 8 years to buy her modest 2-bedroom house, a tiny piece of the American dream that she treated like a palace because she understood its true value. She spoke softly, worked hard, and minded her own business, which made her the perfect target for someone like Karen who mistook kindness for weakness and quiet dignity for ignorance. The property dispute that had brought them to Judge Judy's courtroom was a masterpiece of Karen logic. When Maria had bought her house, the property survey clearly showed where her land ended and Karen's began. But Karen, in her infinite wisdom as a real estate professional, had decided that the survey was obviously wrong, because her mental calculations based on years of experience told her the property line should be 6 inches further into Maria's yard. Without asking permission or even informing her neighbor, Karen had hired a fence company to install a 6-foot privacy fence that deliberately encroached onto Maria's property. When the fence was completed, Karen had actually congratulated herself on her brilliant business sense, believing she had just increased her property value while solving a boundary problem that only existed in her head. Maria's response to discovering the fence had been exactly what any reasonable person would expect. She had politely knocked on Karen's door, explained that the fence was on her property according to the official survey, and asked if they could work together to resolve the issue. Maria had even offered to pay for half the fence relocation costs, despite Karen being entirely at fault. But Karen's reaction to this reasonable request had been pure, concentrated entitlement. She had looked Maria up and down, noted her accent and her cleaning service uniform, and delivered a response that perfectly encapsulated 15 years of unchecked privilege. "I don't think you understand how property values work. This fence is actually improving your land. You should be thanking me, not complaining." When Maria had calmly shown Karen the official survey proving the fence was on her property, Karen had done what Karens do best. She had escalated. "That survey is clearly wrong," she had declared, as if her real estate license gave her the authority to override professional surveyors. "I've been in this business for 15 years. I think I know more about property lines than some piece of paper." When Maria had suggested they could hire a new surveyor to verify the boundaries, Karen had laughed in her face. "I'm not spending money to prove what I already know. That fence stays where it is, and if you have a problem with that, you can take it up with my lawyer." But Maria Santos hadn't backed down. After weeks of Karen's condescending lectures about property law and thinly veiled suggestions that Maria was too uneducated to understand complex real estate matters, Maria had finally issued an ultimatum: move the fence within 30 days or she would have it removed herself. Karen's response had been swift and completely predictable. She had filed a lawsuit demanding $2,500 in damages for emotional distress, harassment, and threatened destruction of property improvements. In Karen's mind, she wasn't just suing for money, she was teaching an important lesson about respecting your betters and staying in your lane. The lawsuit itself read like a masterpiece of entitled delusion. Karen claimed that Maria's aggressive request to move the fence had caused her severe emotional trauma and professional embarrassment. She alleged that Maria's threats to remove the fence constituted property damage and harassment. Most incredibly, she demanded compensation for the improvements she had made to Maria's property without permission, arguing that Maria owed her money for the increased property value. The legal filing was so outrageous that Maria's court-appointed translator had actually asked if there had been some kind of mistake in the paperwork. What Karen didn't realize as she sat in Judge Judy's waiting room, practicing her opening statement and mentally spending her expected settlement money, was that she had chosen the worst possible opponent and the worst possible venue for her particular brand of entitled racism. Judge Judy Schindlin had built her career destroying people who thought their money, status, or skin color gave them the right to abuse others. And unlike the customer service managers and store employees Karen was used to bullying into submission, Judge Judy couldn't be fired, intimidated, or bought. The stage was set for a collision between unstoppable entitlement and immovable justice, and only one of them was going to walk away with their dignity intact. The moment Judge Judy walked into her courtroom, Karen's confidence began its first microscopic crack. At 79 years old, Judith Schindlin moved with the focused energy of a predator who had spent decades perfecting the art of psychological warfare. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in its signature style, and her dark eyes immediately began scanning the room with the calculating precision of someone who could identify bullshit from across a football field. She had read Karen's case file that morning over her coffee, and the combination of obvious racism, stunning entitlement, and complete legal ignorance had actually made her laugh out loud. This was going to be fun. "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Judy began, settling into her chair with the casual authority of someone who had destroyed 10,000 egos before lunch, "you're suing your neighbor for $2,500 because she won't let you keep a fence on her property. Before I hear your explanation for this fascinating legal theory, let me ask you something." She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on that deceptively calm tone that regular viewers knew meant someone was about to get eviscerated. "In your 15 years as a real estate professional, have you ever encountered a situation where someone could legally force their neighbor to accept unauthorized improvements to their property?" Karen, completely missing the trap being set, launched into what she clearly believed was a devastating opening argument. "Your Honor, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of this dispute. As a licensed real estate professional with over 15 years of experience in property valuation and boundary assessment, I can say with complete confidence that my neighbor is confused about the actual property lines." She gestured dismissively toward Maria, who sat quietly with her hands folded. Mrs. Santos, who works as a domestic cleaner, doesn't have the technical expertise to interpret complex surveying documents. I was simply trying to correct an obvious error in the original survey that was clearly conducted by someone who didn't understand the topographical nuances of our neighborhood. The courtroom fell silent as Karen's words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Judge Judy's eyebrow arched in that way that had become an internet meme, and the audience shifted uncomfortably as they processed what they had just heard. Karen, oblivious to the horror she had just unleashed, continued digging her grave. Furthermore, Your Honor, I believe my professional assessment of property values should carry more weight than the uninformed opinions of someone who, frankly, probably doesn't fully understand American property law given her background. She said the last two words with the kind of emphasis that made everyone in the courtroom understand exactly what she meant. Judge Judy slowly removed her glasses and placed them on the bench in front of her. The gesture was deliberate, theatrical, and absolutely terrifying to anyone who understood its significance. Ms. Mitchell, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow managed to fill the entire room. Are you suggesting that your neighbor's immigration status affects her ability to read a legal survey that clearly shows where her property ends and yours begins? The question was delivered with surgical precision, designed to force Karen into either admitting her racism or doubling down on it. Karen, true to form, chose the path of maximum destruction. Well, Your Honor, Karen said with the kind of smile that customer service workers have nightmares about, I'm simply saying that experience matters. I've been reading property surveys since Mrs. Santos was probably still learning English. The gasp from the audience was audible, but Karen was too intoxicated by her own perceived cleverness to notice. It's not about immigration status, it's about professional qualifications. I have a license. I have training. I understand property law in ways that someone who cleans houses for a living simply cannot comprehend. Judge Judy's face went through a transformation that the cameras captured in perfect high definition. Her expression shifted from professional skepticism to barely controlled fury in exactly 2.3 seconds, a moment that would later be dissected frame by frame in countless reaction videos. Ms. Mitchell, she said, standing up slowly from her chair in a move that made the entire courtroom hold its breath. Let me make sure I understand your position. You built a fence on someone else's property, and when they asked you to move it, you sued them, and your justification for this is that you think you're smarter than everyone else because you sell houses for a living? Karen, sensing that things weren't going according to her script, made the fatal decision to interrupt Judge Judy mid-sentence. Your Honor, with all due respect, I don't think you're understanding the complexity of this situation. This isn't just about a fence. This is about property values, neighborhood standards, and frankly, about people knowing their place in the community. The last sentence came out exactly as Karen intended, as a threat designed to put both Maria and Judge Judy back in line. Instead, it had the effect of a nuclear bomb going off in the courtroom. The silence that followed was so complete that the sound technicians later said they could hear Karen's heartbeat through her wireless microphone. Judge Judy walked around from behind her bench, something she had only done 3 times in 24 years of television, and positioned herself directly in front of Karen's chair. Their place, she repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow managed to sound like a roar. Ms. Mitchell, in 25 years as a family court judge and 24 years on television, I have encountered some truly remarkable specimens of human garbage. But you, with your casual racism, your breathtaking arrogance, and your complete inability to understand basic property law, are setting new standards for stupidity. Karen's face went through several colors as she realized that Judge Judy wasn't just disagreeing with her, she was declaring war. But instead of retreating, Karen doubled down with the desperation of someone whose entire worldview was collapsing in real time. I don't have to sit here and be insulted by someone who clearly doesn't understand modern real estate practices, she shouted, standing up and pointing her finger at Judge Judy. This is harassment and I have rights. What happened next will go down as the single most insane moment in courtroom television history. Karen Mitchell, a 45-year-old real estate agent, actually pulled out her iPhone and dialed 911 while standing in Judge Judy's courtroom. Yes, I need police immediately, she announced loudly enough for her voice to echo through the studio. I'm being held against my will and verbally assaulted by a hostile judge who is violating my constitutional rights. The entire courtroom sat in stunned silence as Karen continued her emergency call, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. She's creating a hostile environment and I fear for my safety. Judge Judy simply sat back down and watched the show with the fascinated expression of someone observing a rare species of stupidity in its natural habitat. The bailiff, Petrie Hawkins Bird, positioned himself strategically but made no move to intervene. This was too good to interrupt. The audience members were frantically trying to record with their phones despite the no recording policy, because they knew they were witnessing something that would break the internet. 12 minutes later, 2 LAPD officers walked into the most surreal scene of their careers. They found Karen standing in the middle of a television courtroom, still clutching her phone, demanding justice from America's most famous TV judge, while a studio audience watched in horrified fascination. "Officers, thank God you're here." Karen rushed toward them like they were her salvation. "This judge is abusing her authority and holding me prisoner. I've been verbally attacked and I demand she be arrested for harassment." The officers, clearly trying to process what they were seeing, looked around the courtroom with growing understanding. One officer asked the obvious question, "Ma'am, are you free to leave?" Karen's face went through a series of expressions as she realized the fatal flaw in her plan. "That's not the point," she shrieked. "She can't just dismiss my case because she doesn't like me. This is America." Judge Judy finally spoke up, her voice calm and professional. "Officers, Ms. Mitchell lost her case based on evidence she provided herself. No one is preventing her from leaving, but she seems to believe that losing constitutes false imprisonment." The officers exchanged a look that perfectly communicated their growing realization that they had been called to arrest Judge Judy by someone having a complete mental breakdown. Can you believe what you're seeing? This gets even more unbelievable. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these incredible courtroom moments. Share this with someone who needs to see what happens when Karens meet their match. When the officers explained that Judge Judy had the legal authority to rule on her case and no crime had been committed, Karen's last thread of sanity snapped completely. "You're all corrupt," she screamed, throwing herself onto the courtroom floor in a full toddler-style tantrum. "I'm not leaving until I get justice." The 2 officers looked at each other, sighed deeply, and made the decision that would create the most viral courtroom clip in internet history. What followed was pure comedic gold. 2 professional LAPD officers had to physically lift a grown woman off the floor while she kicked and screamed about her constitutional rights. Karen clutched her designer purse like a life preserver as they carried her toward the exit, her voice echoing through the studio. "This isn't over. I'm suing everyone. I know the mayor." The cameras captured every second of her humiliating escort, from her flailing arms to her threats to sue the entire justice system. Once Karen was removed, Judge Judy turned to Maria with a smile. "Mrs. Santos, not only do you owe nothing, but I'm awarding you $500 for having to deal with this nonsense." The audience erupted in thunderous applause as Maria quietly wiped away tears of relief. Outside in the hallway, Karen's voice could still be heard demanding badge numbers and threatening lawsuits, completely oblivious to the fact that her entire meltdown had been recorded for posterity and was about to make her the most famous Karen in American history. Within 24 hours, Karen Mitchell became the most famous Karen on the planet. The hashtag #JudgeJudyKaren exploded across every social media platform, with the clip of her being carried out by police accumulating 50 million views in the first week. Her real estate career evaporated overnight as clients fled in horror, and her brokerage quietly terminated her contract to avoid the publicity nightmare. Karen attempted multiple appeals and threatened countless lawsuits, all of which were dismissed faster than her dignity. Maria Santos, meanwhile, used her $500 award to throw a block party for her neighbors, celebrating not just her victory, but the moment an entire community watched justice triumph over entitlement. The fence was moved at Karen's expense, and Maria's property value actually increased due to her internet fame as the woman who stood up to the ultimate Karen. 5 years later, Karen's meltdown remains the gold standard for entitled behavior consequences. Law enforcement agencies use the clip in training videos about dealing with delusional complainants. And "Don't be a Judge Judy Karen" became shorthand for checking your privilege before it destroys your life. This incredible courtroom meltdown shows what happens when entitlement meets reality. Don't miss our next breakdown of the most shocking courtroom moments ever caught on camera. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these unbelievable real-life dramas. Drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed a Karen meltdown this epic? What would you have done in Judge Judy's position? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video where we break down another Karen getting exactly what she deserved.